My name is Gabriel Cassim, and I'm here to talk to you about what I call the Firebase PWA kit. But before we do, I actually want to make this a little bit more interactive. Now, I know a lot of you are smart people here, but can I just find out who here is new to web development, or they just started their software development career? Okay, we got one hand here, got another hand. Okay, now awesome, because I'm not going to lie, I made this for you. So what I commonly see in this space, right? So I've been doing this work professionally for 5 years now, and I am a full stack JavaScript developer. So what I usually see is, when someone comes into this space, they start off learning the basics. They want to learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Maybe you'll dabble in jQuery, or if you're really fancy, you'll also try Bootstrap, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. You need to start somewhere. Then what I often see is you then level up, and then you say, okay, cool, let me try this frameworks. Let me try, what's the hype about frameworks? So you go and learn, Angular, you dabble with React, maybe you watch a video on Vue.js. But, I call this the web developer's dilemma for a reason, and it's now the third part, which is the dilemma. So you started off good, and then you improved, but then now you're caught up in a loop. And to quote the astronauts, Houston, we have a problem. But basically, guys, the point I'm trying to get to is the Firebase PWA kit, which I'll talk to you about briefly, is basically just a guide on how you can build apps as simply as possible. It's very easy to try this tool, try that tool, and end up in Wonderland. So here's my recommendation. And you can do this in about a year, depending on how much time you have. So first, start with the basics. There's nothing wrong with that. So you want to master your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If you've got those points covered, you should be fine. After that, I do encourage you to go learn a framework. So in my case, I'm not going to lie, I think Angular is the one to go for. But I think we can wrestle about that outside. And then you're going to need to learn some backend, right? Because the goal here is not to just know code, know this, know that, know everything. I think the goal is obviously to build apps. And in our case, with the Firebase PWA kit, we're trying to build web apps or progressive web apps. So you're going to need to know some backend. And learning Node.js or doing a quick crash course on it will show you how much actually goes into building a backend. I mean, you don't want to spend all of your time, or probably more than half of your time in the project, building a backend that is secure, that is scalable, and all the trouble that comes with it. Which brings me to my next point. Once you've learned the backend, just go straight to Firebase, right? So now you know all the obstacles in the way. You don't want to build your own authentication. You don't want to build your own storage server and then still figure out hosting and figuring out scaling. So I would recommend once you've figured that out, just jump straight into Firebase. And then if you're really savvy, you want to take it another level further, there's Google Cloud, which is a whole world of its own. But there are some great products available on Google Cloud, such as Google Kubernetes Engine, and so on and so forth. So I thought I left the slide out, but might as well. So who am I? Terminal command for those who know. As I've mentioned before, I'm a full stack JavaScript developer, specializing specifically in progressive web app development using Ionic framework, Angular as the actual front-end framework, and then Firebase as the back-end. So Ionic framework is great because it comes with all the components you need. Now, I do think it's useful in some instances to have your own design systems, as we've seen presented here previously. But if you're someone like me, you probably just want to build the app and do it as quickly as possible, let's be honest. So using Angular is great for that because it comes with all the UI components you'll need, buttons, nav bars. They've even gone as far as to add modals and all the likes thereof. and then using Angular for your front-end framework, it's great because remember now, you know HTML, you know CSS, and you know JavaScript, and that's all you need to now take it that step further. Granted, yes, Angular is TypeScript-based, but you will pick it up. And then obviously Firebase is your backend. I mean, now you've gone from spending hours, maybe, I don't even know, but hours and hours building your backend, and now you can replace that with a few minutes of clicking on, the Google Cloud Console, the Firebase console, and then doing some config work on your terminal, as well as on your project, and then boom, you have a backend. So, yeah, this is what I'm here for, guys. I've gone ahead and created a repo on GitHub. For those of you who are new to this, check this out. So basically, in this repo, I share some code snippets, and I also introduce some basic concepts for you. But essentially, if you're building a web app, there are some core components you're going to need, and I would recommend that you build those first. And then, obviously, there are the unique attributes of your application, which will require a bit more time. So at the top, in this tutorial, you can scan the QR code, or you can go to that bit.ly link. Alternatively, my GitHub name is TalkSuite. Don't ask why. But yeah, I'll take you through initializing an Ionic web app with Angular, and then I'll take you through adding PWA elements. So once you have your web app, right, it's really just a website that looks and feels like an app, right? However, you do want to take it a step further and make sure you have the necessary metadata to be able to deploy it as a progressive web app. So that's where adding the PWA elements comes in. Once again, all of this is all on that GitHub page. Second to that is integrating Firebase. Now, to do this, you can go the manual route of, manually using the Firebase SDKs. But in my case, I'll recommend you use this package called Angular Fire, or Angular Fire 2. So what Angular Fire is going to do for you, right, it's really going to make it simple for you to bring Firebase into your project. You put a module into your app module, feed it your API keys, and then from a component or a page perspective, right, you just pull in that particular helper function. So if you want database, you'll use the Angular Fire Firestore module. If you want auth, you'll use the Angular Fire auth module. So that's a very useful package. Do use it. Then I'll talk you through authentication, right? So most people just authenticate people onto their app, and that's fine, but they stop there. I have to recommend that you take it a step further and make sure that your users are assigned roles. So in this tutorial, I'll also go through some common roles you want to have in your app and how you add those roles to the user's document, all on Firestore. And then, now that you have auth in your app, you have your app up, it's connected to Firebase, you now want to make it a bit more secure. So that's where page guards come in. I'm not sure who's familiar with route guards, Angular route guards. Cool. Do you quickly want to tell us what it is? Am I allowed to do this? So what is a page route guard? %. So in short, it's a way of kind of limiting access to a page, right? So in our case, we want to link that to our authentication. So in some cases, you want to only allow authenticated users to a specific route, maybe /homepage, /dashboard, /myprofile. Those are only pages accessible to authenticated users. But then if you have roles attached to the user, you can go even further and say, this role, perhaps admin, should have access to everything. A visitor should only have access to our splash and should only have access to our landing page. So I talk you through all of that. Once again, guys, go ahead and scan that QR code. Then, obviously, the work is still not done. You need to secure things also on the Firebase console. So under your Firestore tab, you can define Firestore rules. and I do walk you through some rules once again in there. But the rules will just basically make sure that, let's say someone is smart enough to crack your page guards, you can actually block them off by writing rules that are associated with authentication and the user's roles. And then last but not least, the easy step, right? The breather. So once you've done all of this hard work, the last thing you want to do is you want to begin testing deployment to Firebase hosting. So I have all of this on that repo. It was my first time creating something like that, so I'd love to hear your feedback. So now I'm just briefly going to show some code snippets of what I'm talking about. And we've disappeared. I don't think. But yeah, so like I say, guys, the link I've shared, that's a GitHub repo where I have all the steps. So I'll just show you 2 or 3 steps, which are some of the important steps that you might want to know. So, there we go. Sweet. Thank you. So you have let's assume you have your Ionic Angular app, right? You've initialized it. I'm not going to go through those steps. I'm sure you can find the steps on the tutorial, on the relevant documentation. But you've initialized your app. Everything's ready. But now you want to turn it into a progressive web app. So running this one Angular command, it's going to add that dependency. And in addition to that, it's going to generate the relevant icon files, which is metadata you need when you now ship your progressive web app. And in addition to that, it's going to do a bunch of things. It's also going to add a service worker, but those are details I won't go into. But one other thing it's going to do is it's going to add this Add to Home Screen button to your web app. And this is the point where you can officially declare your app as a progressive web app. So let's quickly jump to the user. So I've got a model here, or schema, of the user, which you don't have to go with this structure, but I do recommend it. So common things that you will store under your user document is obviously ID, the email, the photo URL or the photo icon, then the user's display name, as well as when they returned or when the document was created. But then something a lot of people don't add is roles, like I've mentioned. So you can actually specify roles, like I've said, which is just an object where you have different values that are booleans. If I am a visitor, then obviously the first will be true. If not, one of the others will be true. So you want to go with this structure, right? And at first you might not add them, but you do want to add them because it does tie in to your Firebase security as well as your auth guards. So speaking thereof, let's jump to the Firebase side of things. So quick question, how many people here are familiar with Firebase rules? Okay, few, thank you. For those who aren't, so I've attached 2 helper functions at the top. The first function is owner. It's just a basic helper function that will help you determine on the Firebase rules section if that particular user trying to access that particular document is the owner of that document. And then you can also have, then I've also added the helper function for checking the role of the user. So if I am an admin, I should be allowed everywhere. But if I'm a visitor, then I shouldn't be allowed to see maybe the product or messages, whatever it is. So you can actually write rules. So here, for example, let's say we had a collection at the bottom here. We're working with our users collection, but let's say we had a collection with private information or confidential data. You can then say, okay, cool, I only want to allow subscribed users and my admin to read, and maybe the admin can also delete. So once again, guys, all of this is on that repo. I've just pulled a few screenshots. And then last but not least, the deployment. So I've jumped a few steps, but that's because I don't want to do everything for you. If you really want to do it, check out the tutorial. But what you want to first do is you want to install Firebase tools to your terminal. And you do that by running npm install Firebase tools. I just noticed we missed the global flag, so you want to add a -G. Then after that, you want to go into your project directory, and then you can initialize Firebase. Now this is going to add a config into your directory, explaining where your actual app is once it's been built. It's also explaining, the relevant metadata you need to actually deploy. And then the second last step you're going to do, obviously, is to build your app. Like I said, this is now when your TypeScript app gets compiled, and you're left with some CSS, JavaScript, and HTML files, which the browser can read. And that usually will go into a www folder. Once that's done, all you have to do to deploy to Firebase hosting is run Firebase deploy, and you can add -- only hosting. You could also go Firebase deploy, but if you have other things you're using, like perhaps Cloud Functions or some other Firebase tool that you've initialized into the project, then you do want to use this if you're only going to deploy to hosting. Because if you run just Firebase deploy, it's going to deploy all of them. So guys, that's it. This is the Firebase kit on a high level. Do check it out. It's up on GitHub. And please also give me your comments. And yeah, I hope this was helpful, especially to those who are new to the space. Thank you.